Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Joel Rosen. I am the Adrenal Fatigue Recovery Ninja, and today I want to do a case study on a hormone review for a dried urinary total cortisol and hormone test for a 50-year-old female who is dealing with fatigue, anxiety, depression, overwhelm, and we did a Dutch test and we got a lot of findings on here that I think you're going to find very insightful and very useful as to why we would do a dried urinary total cortisol test. So the way that works is you do 4 or 5 readings throughout the day. So you do it at the time that you have your dinner time, the time that you go to bed, the time that you wake up, and 2 hours later. And what's really great about that is that your bedtime and my bedtime, your dinner time and my dinner time, your waking up and my waking up are all different. And when you program it to a certain amount of a certain time frame that a lot of the saliva tests suggest, then you're going to miss out on some of the nuances of your own. There's a couple other things that I would recommend that this test is not necessarily doing, like doing it within the first 5 minutes, then 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and an hour, and we can catch that cortisol awakening response. But this is a pretty good case study. So first thing that we found is that her rhythm was actually really good, and there is a lot of controversy on the urine test and as whether or not it relates to the circadian rhythm, the dineural pattern. It does. I've done enough to see that it really does. I can tell with those that have a good awakening response and those that have a terrible awakening response, you can capture that spike within the first 2 hours when you measure the first morning urine and 2 hours later. So she did have a good one. She said it kind of gets a little going. It takes her a little while to get going in the morning, but once she does, she's pretty good. So that correlated quite nicely. However, we saw with her 24-hour free cortisol that it was actually pretty good. This is the low, this is the high, so she was in that 3/4 range, and that could be misleading. If she went for a saliva test, she would have been told that her saliva values were pretty good, or they were in the middle of the range. But when we looked at her metabolized, which is how much do you actually produce for the entire day, which represents about 95% of your total cortisol amount, whereas the 24-hour free represents only 5%. And it sucks to make conclusions on 5% saying, hey, your 5% is okay, so your 100% or your 95% must be okay. But it's not. You can see it's actually quite low. Her metabolized cortisol was quite low. And that is alarming. And the reason that is if you think about the HPA axis, she asked, hey, why is my metabolized so low? And I said, well, think about it. If you've had stress, immune challenges, infections, psychosocial, divorces, children, all of the above, injuries, over time, your hypothalamus and pituitary are releasing a signal to make cortisol. Over time, that cortisol is going to feed back and inhibit the HPA axis and start to downregulate. And that's what you're seeing there. But the other thing that we see is that her total DHEA is low too. And you'll see that with a chronic stress response where not only is it going to inhibit the HPA axis, it's also going to ultimately cause an imbalance between the cortisol firing and your DHEA receptors, your sex hormones from firing. And it's not so much a pregnenolone steal as it's just we have orders of magnitude of more receptors for cortisol and its functioning versus DHEA. So we'll get into that in a second. The other thing we saw on her hormones was her E2, her estradiol was in the middle, but her progesterone was really, really low. So that is indicative of someone that has an estrogen dominance. And that was something that we will talk to with her, and I'll save for another video. The other thing that we saw, though, which was quite amazing, is that usually when you see a HPA axis that's downregulated and DHEA that's downregulated, you'll see 5-alpha being upregulated. So that's when we see women that are maybe PCOS, or they have oily skin, or unwanted facial hair, or baldness, or losing of their hair, or even cysts on their ovaries. I mean, she's 50, she's not having a cycle anymore, but this isn't a problem for her. And I said, of course it's not. Your enzymes are not really creating a more androgenic breakdown, and that's a good thing to see, because you'll see that be correlated with the stress response. The more inflammation, the more things that are causing the metabolized cortisol to be decreased would be the same things that would be causing 5-alpha to be upregulated, but that wasn't happening. The other thing that we saw was her methylation activity was actually really good. You would expect with phase 1 of estrogen metabolism, if it's working really well and it's bringing these partially metabolized hormones to be cleared by the liver, and methylation is really slow, then that can create that estrogen dominance that we had, where estrogen was recirculating in the cells and binding and not being utilized effectively. But her methylation was looking great. Here's where I really want to do a case study for you. Her 11 beta HSD was really, really low. So what on earth does that mean? Basically, 11 beta HSD is the enzyme that decides, hey, we got a lot of reserves here, which is cortisone, and we have a stress response. We need to convert the inactive troops or the reserves cortisone into cortisol because we have a stress response. And in her body, the 11 beta HSD was down regulated, or it was more promoting the inactive troops. So let's talk about this. She had a suppressed HPA axis. She had a suppressed total DHEA, and instead of trying to wring out the sponge and get every little last juice of cortisol into the battle, her body's also taking that out of the equation. She asked, why would it do that? And I said, well, over time, when you've been under stress and your HPA axis has been firing over and over and over again, and your brain is finally getting the signals to downregulate, it does it in a protective way. And you got to think about it. The body's trying to conserve itself. If it's constantly catabolic and breaking tissue down, then it's going to have ultimately that flat line and that wear and tear. And we already saw her curve was coming back, so we know she's rebounding from this. But she is having a problem with getting her active cortisone into the cell for use, and she is having a problem producing enough cortisol for the day. So one of the amazing supplements that we could recommend for her is licorice root. Licorice root will help convert the inactive cortisone into cortisol. And the reason I know I'm not scared, or I'm absolutely certain to make a recommendation for it, is because her metabolized cortisol is low. If her metabolized cortisol was high, I may not recommend that licorice root because she already is producing too much. So that was a real take-home message, and I hope that's a take-home message from you. The last thing that we see on the organic acid test was her B12 levels were high, which suggests deficiencies, which is a methylation issue, which is going to be difficult for breaking down hormones and breaking down adrenaline, and repairing your cells and producing serotonin. A lot of things that's going to be impactful for. She was low or deficient on her glutathione, which would make sense. We see those two occurring together, where if you have high B12, it's oxidized, it's not being utilized, and you're producing a lot of free radicals, and you're depleting your glutathione, which she is doing. And then also she had elevated noradrenaline, which again, if she has low B12 and she is depleting her glutathione and she's not making SAMe, she's not going to clear out her adrenaline. She asked me, well, why is my adrenaline high? And I asked her, you tell me, like, are you stressed? Do you have, oh yeah, lots of stress. Well, that's what's happening. So here are some of the things we recommended. We recommended some licorice root to help with that 11 beta HSD. We recommended some glutathione. We also recommended some SAMe potentially. And in this case, I did recommend a little bit of pregnenolone. The reason I recommended pregnenolone was her progesterone was low, her cortisol was low, and she was feeling very depleted. So we'll do a 30-day trial on that and see how she does. And then the goal would be to retest her and see how she's doing. So anyways, if I would have had her urine samples plus her blood samples plus her saliva samples, I would have been able to give her a lot of insight. Plus, I've already done her genetics, I've already done her gut health, so we're really, honing in and giving her some specific recommendations. So anyways, I hope you found this very, very useful. My name is Dr. Joel Rosen. I am the Adrenal Fatigue Recovery Ninja, and if you're dealing with a hormonal problem and you don't think that you're getting the proper help, and your doctors are telling you there's no such thing as an HPA axis dysfunction or adrenal adrenal fatigue problem and you want to be able to help yourself naturally, and you know that the bioidentical hormones or the synthetics or the protocols that you're using aren't working, it's time to give me a call. So just leave a message, give me a thumbs up. You can PM me in my private Facebook group, and we can troubleshoot what's working or what's not working with you and get your life back. Again, my name is Dr. Joel Rosen. I am the Adrenal Fatigue Recovery Ninja, and I look forward to ending your adrenal fatigue nightmare. Thank you so much.